Right, hello folks, welcome to the Climate Emergency Subcommittee of the Neighbourhoods and Environment Scrutiny Committee. I'm Annette Wright, I'm going to be chairing the meeting, and there are four councillors here, Councillor Jevons over there, Councillor Lyons, Councillor Kilpatrick and Councillor Shilton Godwin, who's just gone to get a bag, and this is Lee, who's going to be making the notes for the meeting. What we wanted to do, the agenda and all the documents are online, so people should have been able to have a look at those. I think there's some paper copies somewhere if people haven't managed to do that. What we wanted to start with is actually the end of the agenda, which is just the terms of reference. We'll come on to the work programme at the end of the meeting. But just so people are clear, and that those of us on the committee can just agree we're happy with our objectives and our lines of inquiry. So what we're here to do is monitor the progress of each point of the climate emergency motion carried by Manchester City Council on the 10th of July. Ensure the Manchester Climate Change Action Plan includes specific measurable targets and review progress towards achieving them on a quarterly basis. Identify additional measures which could be put in place by Manchester City Council or partners to help reach the zero carbon target, and update the Neighbourhood and Environment Scrutiny Committee 4 times a year. So we can make recommendations to the Neighbourhood and Environment Scrutiny Committee, which most of us are on, but that's kind of the extent of our authority. So we're not here to change decisions that have already been made. That's going to be our remit for this committee. And we want to involve as many people as possible in this committee. It's good we've got members of the public here. I'll just go through the rest of the agenda in a minute about when you can participate. I can see people are filming the meeting, that's absolutely fine. But it's not going to be on the council website, which is because of our contract with the people who do our filming. That we're not able to film subcommittees. We were only able to film the actual scrutiny committees because of the contract that we've got with them. Just our key lines of inquiry are going to be to obtain reports from relevant departments in relation to progress of the points in the climate emergency motion, ensuring that deadlines are met, obtain updates on progress of the production of the climate action plan and regular updates once it's implemented, investigate initiatives which could be considered to help achieve zero carbon targets, obtain updates from each scrutiny committee to assess incorporation and progress of zero carbon actions in relation to each area of work, and invite and obtain reports from relevant experts, including from Greater Manchester Combined Authority, to assess existing actions and suggest new ones. Is everybody happy that that's what we're working to? Yeah, okay, thanks very much. Have we had any apologies, Lee?
We've received apologies this morning from Councillor Whiston.
Okay, thank you. Right, just a few other points. If people are going to speak, switch your microphone on. If anybody over there is going to speak, you'll need to come to the table and switch your microphone on, because we are recording this just to do the minutes of it, just for our own purposes. What else do I need to say to people? So what we're intending to do with the agenda, so there's the climate change action plan update, which we're going to take first. Then we're going to go on to the declaration response, so that's the motion that was carried, and then the climate emergency and community engagement. We've got a lot of questions about the action plan update. Nobody from the members of the public have said they've got anything specific on that, but once we get to the end of that document, if we've missed anything and anyone wants to come in, then I'll ask you at that point. 3 or 4 people have notified me that they do want to say something around the motion. So when we get onto that section, we'll call people up to talk to us about that. And again, I think we've just got lots of questions. So we're starting with the climate change action plan update. So this is point 1. So we've got the document about it and we've got the appendix. What we intend to do with this is just go through each point of the action plan. and we've got questions about it. We're not here to kind of put people on the spot and say, you must know the answer to this minute, and we appreciate you might have to take some of these questions away. But what we want to get to with this is the action plan, for people who don't know, that was presented to the Neighbourhoods and Environment Scrutiny Committee in July, and it's to come back to that committee in February. And obviously things have happened in between then, which we'll need to pick up on. But also what we want to pick up on is what we want that document to look like when it comes back to the Neighbourhoods and Environment Scrutiny Committee in February. So we're going to raise these points as we go through. So, you know, we expect some of this to be out of date and there to be updates to it. And we've also got points to make about the format of it. Is that okay with everybody at the end there? Yeah.
Sorry, just say one thing. We have the report scheduled for February, Neighbourhoods and Environment. What we've done in the past is just to update this annually at the moment. So if obviously we need to just plan for it. If you want the full update of this, we'll arrange that for the February meeting. But just say the last year we have done it annually, just based on the fact that some of the progress hasn't moved as quickly as others. So we used to publish it quarterly, but we can do that for the February meeting if that's what the Neighbourhoods and Environment Scrutiny Committee want.
Okay, sorry, can you clarify this? I understood this was coming back in February to Neighbourhoods and Environment. Is that not right?
There's an item scheduled, yeah, on the forward plan, but in the past we've done like a 6-month update. So we've done the annual report in July, and then we've done a focus report on kind of what else has happened. That's been more of a narrative report, looking at some things like other things like work with partners and schools. So we can do a full update of this action plan, but that is kind of the appendix to sit alongside the annual reporting, because the annual reporting includes all the data, which is only really worth looking at on an annual basis. So this is the qualitative bit, so just to clarify that.
Right, okay, I think, can we just deal with this? I think what we're going to be suggesting to you is that that's not the best way to do it. And as we go through, we can explain what we're talking about. But I think, given the terms of reference that I've just read out, what we need to be able to do is monitor progress against the motion that's been carried. And in order to do that, we're going to need some facts and figures where we can see what's happening with the carbon emissions from all of the items on this action plan. So we've got some suggestions to make to you, but our starting point can't be that it's going to stay the same as it's always been, because I think the reason we've set up this subcommittee is to give this issue time to be discussed thoroughly, and I think what will come out of that is that we need to look at doing some things differently. So is that okay? We'll so just make
more than happy to do that differently. Yeah, I was just talking about how it had been historically. That's all. And obviously, we will be producing a new version of this for the new plan from March 2020 onwards.
I can see people want to talk to me at the back there, but can we just go through this document ourselves, and then if there are points we've missed, I'm happy to call people in then, but we've got a very detailed list of questions that we want to ask to get to the bottom of this. Is that all right? Can people bear with us for a few minutes? Okay, thanks. I think what we need in future is we need an action plan which has measurable targets and figures in it. So we need to know what our carbon emissions are, and what we need to bring them down to, and what we've achieved towards that aim. And there are a lot of points on this action plan. Sorry, oh, hello, Councillor Clay. There are a lot of points on this action plan. Sorry, this has just thrown me. Do you want to just sit over there, Ben? You're not part of this committee. Is that all right? The committee's just sitting here and then everybody else is sitting back there. Okay. What we need to look at is... I'm just totally threw me, sorry. We need to have figures of where we're at, where we're trying to get to, and how far we've got along that line. We don't necessarily need all the 20 points that are in this action plan, and we'll come on to that as we start talking about it. But what we want to look at is what is measurable and where can we reduce our carbon emissions. And there's lots of other things within this, but I think that is what this subgroup wants to look at. We need to honestly assess where we're at and where we need to get to and how we're doing in relation to that target. And I think in some of the discussions, it will come out as to how we might be able to do that. Yeah, Councillor Lyons.
Thank you. Just following on from that point, I think also against each one of these points, we need to see what communication's being done with the public, and not only the public ourselves, against each one of these points. I think there's a general frustration, I think everyone would agree, that we're not doing enough, when actually some of the work here is really good, but no one knows about it, so we really should be telling people about it. And also, having that conversation with the public, not just having the one where, you know, this is what we're doing. It's a continuous consultation with people, and, you know, people always bring up new ideas, or they might ring alarm bells about some of the work we're doing. So I think it would be really good to, against each one of these bullet points, I don't think there needs to be 20, but each one of these bullet points, we have some communication about them, what's going out.
So I'm going to just take any other general questions on the action plan document, and then we'll go on to the action plan. So do any of the committee have any other general questions? Yeah, Councillor Shilton-Godwin.
It isn't a general question so much as we need to be really clear what the target actually is, so what the base point, what we're measuring from, and when, because we've got lots of different moving targets, haven't we? We've got the original 2050 target, we've got the stuff about 2038, I've seen some stuff in here about 2040 as well, which I'm not sure whether it's in this document or another one, and now we've got the ambition for the 2031, and so somehow we need to reflect that so people can clearly see where the emissions really lie, what are the real issues, because some of these things are much more important, account for far more of our emissions than other things.
Have we any other points on this covering document? I've just got a couple of other things, if not. Yeah, Councillor Kilpatrick.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick overview point. I think that from the overview document rather than the appendix, obviously there's quite a large focus on what the operational estates largely, and I think that's understandable because that's what we can dictate within a tight time frame. But it does also mention on section 5.2 other operational estates that don't necessarily fall within MCC responsibility. Bruntwood is mentioned, for example, as well as one of the universities and some of the housing associations. It would be interesting if we could in the future get a report on the largest contributor to carbon in the city, which is the private sector. And in particular, I know that aviation is mentioned, but it's something that I will always talk about because MCC is actually responsible for a percentage of the airport emissions, so it'd be good to understand where that fits in within the wider zero carbon strategy.
Okay, does anyone want to answer that point, or are we just noting that for now?
Thank you, Chair. Just, I am getting a bit lost in the detail of it, although obviously we are making notes, and we are very happy to present and produce the information in the way that you wanted. Just to take us one step back, if I may, I think this sort of overview paper before the spreadsheet is about how, following the climate emergency, how we are moving in terms of looking at the structure and how we are going to deliver on this very, very big ambition to make our city carbon neutral. And what we have said is that we are going to reduce our carbon emissions in the next 5 years by 50%. In the last 10 years, we managed to reduce it by 48%. Now we're going to redouble our efforts. And the other thing that I wanted to point out is that there are no more, or the easy wins, the low-hanging fruit has been already picked. So it is a right challenge in terms of how we move forward, how we target the action, but also how do we consolidate between carbon reductions and also make the business cases for the projects that we want to see in the future. Another thing, just to put all of this in context, is that in the city, Manchester City Council, whose carbon footprint is 2% or around about 2% of the city, our carbon footprint is primarily down to buildings, emissions from buildings, 68.9% or there and thereabouts, street lights, our waste fleet, and then our staff travel, and then we've got some other sort of areas. So in terms of our action plan, these are going to always feature very, very heavily in where our carbon savings are going to be. This is a test that we need to pass. How do we reduce our emissions? And then the other bit that we need to do is to see how we can, which is also at the back of this paper in the diagram, is how do we work with the city in terms of supporting the city and supporting our partners, working with like-minded organisations to begin with, building on the relationships that we already have. We are already working with 60 organisations that present 20% of our carbon emissions. So I think what we are suggesting sort of over here is to, as a first step, establish a group that will look at what it is that we're doing in the city and how are we moving from these spreadsheets that you've got, which is sort of the old spreadsheets, and what are the things that we're going to do in the next 5 years and then moving forward. So lots of discussions and lots of staff time is being spent on this and has been spent since the last motion. And then we're also looking at ensuring that the Manchester Climate Change Agency is fit for purpose to deliver, to help us deliver for the rest of the city. The other thing that I just really wanted to point out is in terms of the rest of the city, the carbon savings will come from transport, 29%, domestic, 27%, and business, 45%. In terms of the aviation, Councillor Kilpatrick, we are already talking to the Manchester Climate Change Agency and the Tyndall Foundation to see what does that mean, including their budgets into our city budgets. And also there was a request about bringing the carbon neutrality forward, which we are talking to our partners in the Climate Change Agency about. I just wanted to kind of like lift it kind of like a step up to just outline the approach in terms of delivering this.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Stoyer. What I think we want to get down to is the detail of some of this. And I think from what you've said there, I think you're suggesting that it is possible for us to get a document where we can look at the carbon reductions, where they're happening, where else they need to happen. And I think that will help this committee, help you to take things forward. So just one final point on the covering document. There's now a zero carbon coordinating group, which we weren't aware of, I think, until we saw this document. Can you just tell us who's on that? When does it meet? Can we go and take part or go and observe it? Can we have the minutes from it? Are they going to be made public?
There is more detail on the second paper. If you would like to move to the second paper, I will ask Carol to tell you more about this group.
Right, I don't know what you mean by the second paper. This is first raised in the covering document for the action plan. So can you tell us more about it now? Is that okay?
The Zero Carbon Group is the officer group that we agreed to set up after the climate emergency declaration was made. It includes representation from all of the departments across the council and is very, very focused on if we in the council need that leadership role of halving our carbon output over the next 4 or 5 years, what are the big things that we need to do to achieve it? So some of the areas of work will include, inevitably, looking at our operational estate, looking at the staff travel policy, but importantly as well, making sure that this work is embedded into all of the council's kind of decision-making processes, because we're not going to have our maximum influence if this isn't part of, we look at in procurement processes, in sort of the links with the local plan for planning purposes and everything else. So we're just trying to make sure, in the first instance, this is front and foremost of everybody's thinking, then we're very clear of the actions that we've got to take over the next year and the next 4 years.
Okay, so who specifically is on this group? Is it heads of departments? Who is it?
It's at senior level. It's supported by David Hulliston. So, for example, for neighbourhood services, Fiona Worrell attends. For corporate property, it's Richard Munns, who's in charge of corporate property estate. For capital programmes, it's Jared Allen. Rather than read them all out now, I'm happy to supply the list of members.
Okay, that's great. And can we attend that?
Some not kind of normal protocol for scrutiny subgroup members to attend that, but what we can do is bring the summary of that work back to this group as a matter of course.
Yeah, John Connor. I'm going to call people by the first names.
Thank you. What political representation is on that committee? Is it Richard Lees? Is it Andrea Custodja?
Councillor Stoyer sits in her lead exec member role, but it's an officer forum as opposed to a political one. And as I said, I'm sort of happy to feed back each month the work that we're doing.
William?
So it sounds like an inward-facing group of people. What's the interface with the outward-facing aspect? I think we just described there's obviously the City Council can do a lot towards making a difference, but we're only part of a larger picture. So does it have an outward-facing aspect to it?
Absolutely, that's the link with the Climate Change Action Partnership.
Okay, are we taking minutes of this meeting? And if so, can we have them?
So on the first couple of meetings, so we've got our terms of reference, which I'm obviously happy to circulate that. Yeah, we've got the high-level ones, but we've got a more detailed one, which includes membership as well. And we're working on a forward plan for that group as well. So we have had external challenge. We actually met yesterday, which would happen since we drafted the paper. So we had Bruntwood came along to that. So we had their Director of Energy and Estates came to the meeting to talk about some of the lessons that Bruntwood have learned from this work across their estate. And we hope to have people like Northwoods come in as well to talk to us at the next meeting. So I can provide that. What we actually did instead of minutes for the last meeting is produced a slide pack that went to SMT, and there's also something that went to EMG as well. So we can circulate a slide pack. It's less than formal meetings. We've kind of got an action tracker, and then we produce the slide pack based on the kind of 4 work streams of the group.
So can we just have whatever this group is producing then? Is that okay? Yeah. Okay, thanks very much. Sorry, point 1, which is about delivering the street lighting LED replacement programme. Does anyone from the committee have anything to ask about that? No? Are we all right? So, I mean, I think in terms of the sort of information we're looking for, on this point, we have got the total estimated CO2 savings, and we've got some information about how far we've got towards that, and I think that is what we would like to see for all of the other points on the action plan in future. Point 2 is deliver the Civic Quarter heat network. William.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this network is being developed right next to this building. It's in my ward, so I know a lot about it. It's a good news story in terms of the improvements that we're doing to manage our own controlled estate. You did what my question was, maybe you could just give a little bit more background on it. I mean, whilst it's described here, I think it's an example where communication could be a lot more effective about shouting this sort of investment the City Council has done to improve the amount of the energy impact of its own estate, and it's a large estate in terms of the city centre particularly. Also, you did just intimate in the question you just answered a minute ago, I'd like to know as well, how is this being used as an example to other developers and areas that are being developed within the city as a model maybe that they should be using? We've got a lot of areas that are being developed. St John's, Mayfield, those are city centre ones. There are plenty of other examples across the city. And I'd like to hear that we are telling them what we are doing and use it as an example of good practice. Because I believe it is good practice.
does someone want to come back on that, or can we just agree that we will do something to get this information out there, whether that's put something on the website, do a press release, whatever suggestions people have got, to make that more public and to encourage other people to get involved in that?
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. And communications is obviously part of the Zero Carbon Coordination Group, so we really want to up our game on the communications. I think the specific point on the technical side is how we promote that to other areas of the city. I know there are other, I'm not an expert on heat networks, but there are other areas of the city where they've been looking at similar approaches, so we can take that away. Okay,
point 3 is the MCC Estate Transformation Programme. I'll probably take point 3 and point 4 together. The MCC is the Estates Rationalisation Plan. So we're assuming this covers buildings that we're closing or getting rid of and what we're doing with the buildings that are left. So does someone want to ask some questions on that?
I mean, I just wanted to be clear, particularly about point 4. We're talking here about, again, the influence that the City Council has, so it's limited to that aspect. You know, we have less staff. There have been major cuts forced upon the council, and therefore we have less staff. In reality, is this just less staff, therefore less buildings, or is it, what element of it is actually a more proactive approach? The reality, you know, as I say, is if you've got less people, you have less places for them need to work. But what is the balance between the two? Because I don't think that's quite clear in here from my point of view.
Okay, Richard.
Yeah, I mean, just to build on that point, it says, and I quote, continue to undertake rationalisation of identified council buildings whilst calculating carbon savings. But of course, those buildings, whether they're rationalised or not, will go on for public-private usage and will incur carbon output. So I think it's coming back to the point I made earlier, actually, about we can define what the council is responsible for and what it isn't responsible for, but within that rationalisation programme, is there any requirement, if it is then sold on to a developer, etc., that they meet, you know, carbon zero carbon ideally, but to reduce that carbon output as much as possible?
Do you want to answer?
Again, I'm not an expert on estates, but I'll explain what I think the case is. So our position in the past on buildings that we've transferred out of the council's use has been that we only report on buildings where we are responsible for paying the energy bills on those buildings. That does include some operated buildings on our behalf, like the Bridgewater Hall, for instance. So it's not just that they are occupied by the council. There is a rationale for doing that. I think it's one of the areas, to be honest, where within the decision-making element we talked about before, that is one of the things we want to look at in terms of what are we asking for when we either do leases or disposals, and how we're using our powers to do that. So I wouldn't say we're doing that across the board at the moment. I think it's one of the things we want to look at in terms of our levers as a council when we own assets, freehold, or we're leasing out buildings, what actually we're asking for of the future tenants of those buildings. Because, as I say, for a reporting basis, we would record those savings, and in terms of rationalising our estate, if we no longer require a building, we would record those savings as a reduction in consumption. But obviously, like you say, that building goes on to be used by others in the city, so we do need to be clear about what levers we have.
Yeah, Richard, do you want to come back?
Just really quickly. And I guess then we want assurances that somewhere within a model of viability, when deciding in the procurement process, or rather the selling process, who to lease a building to or to sell a building to, that any future carbon output is almost monetised, so that we understand that, okay, you know, it might be quite an attractive lease for the council. However, if it's going to increase carbon emissions within the city by X percentage, then we need to take that into consideration, or another offer, for example. So it's just trying to, and also get a little bit of legal assurances if that is even possible. I know that the council will have a specific policy in its lease arrangements, and it's probably a question for the city solicitor, to be honest, so I appreciate that it's a hard one. But to get further assurances there that policies exist that means that we can make those decisions based on a zero carbon target.
So is that okay? Can we take that away and come back with an answer about where we stand with that? Is that all right? Okay.
Sorry, did you want me to answer the first question just briefly? I think it's a combination of, obviously, number of staff we have got has reduced substantially over the past few years. Equally, we're working very differently, so it's things like 7 to 10 desk ratios, supporting people so they don't always have to go back to an office space, and supporting people to work where it's most appropriate, so it's a combination.
Just on this point as well, we've got reference to 13 buildings and we've got reference to 15 buildings in the other document, I think, or the other way around. Can we just have a list of which buildings we're talking about and why we're only, and the total number of buildings that we've got and why we're talking about just these 15 or 13 buildings, how they've been chosen? Is that okay?
Yeah, I mean, we could bring something back to the next meeting. Obviously, our operational estate is quite complex. There's around about 350 buildings we report on. The rationale, very briefly, they looked at the top 20 emitting buildings at the time of the carbon reduction programme. There were reasons why some of those couldn't be included in the scheme, so the final number is 13, and that is the capital approval for spend on those buildings is 13 buildings, so we can provide more detail about what's happening in each of those buildings.
And I think what would be useful as well is a time scale of when we're going to be able to look at these other buildings, you know, and at what point we think we'll have dealt with all the buildings that we have.
That's the work we're doing at the minute. There's a very significant price tag to doing everything. So we're making sure we align it with the asset management plan when works have to be done, because you can get considerable efficiencies if we look at the carbon measures and the repairs at the same time, and also where we'll have the biggest impact.
So point 5, which is where financially viable, implement suggested actions from energy audits and evaluate impact on energy consumption and carbon emissions. Mandy.
It seems to me that there's quite a lot to unpack in here, because there's a qualifier where financially viable. Obviously, we are all very, very conscious of the impact of the lack of money that the council's got. So we know that we're working under those constraints. But what's that tipping point, and what can we do to ensure that and what are we doing to ensure that wherever we can do something that is that improves our position, and that we are doing those energy audits, including really just the small things like making sure people switch off lights.
Does anyone want to come back on that now?
I'll have a go. Yeah, so within the kind of the work that estates are doing, they're looking at 3 areas. So one is reduce, so kind of what are the energy efficiency measures we can place in buildings. Some of that, I think, is proven technology, and it's about implementing that where we can. Then they're looking at produce, which is production of energy from our estate, so solar PV, heat pumps, or possibly more ambitious things. Other councils have done some really innovative things. We're trying to look at what are the opportunities for production, and then the final area will be then to start connecting, so microgrids, buildings. To be honest, that is more of the innovative space. We're not really there yet. I think we're moving probably from reduce, which we kind of understand quite well, into the production space, and that's where our kind of thinking around phase 3 of the buildings work is going to be. So we'll continue to do the proven technology bits, but really, as Carol said earlier on, if we're going to look at the big ticket items, we need to be looking at energy production across our estate where possible. Some of that, obviously, the investment models for doing that need looking at, and I wouldn't say we're there yet, because there's a question about financial budgets and carbon budgets and how we apply that to our estate. So the previous carbon reduction programme, return on investment wise, paid itself back quite easily because of there was a rationale for doing that. Obviously, as the low-hanging fruit has gone, it gets harder to do that. So that is again part of what we're looking at within the group.
Yeah, Richard.
Just to focus on the financial viable aspect to it, I guess. It's always I always get a little bit worried when people mention financial viability and cost-benefit analysis when we talk about climate change, because obviously we're in a climate emergency. Is there any assessment being done on the cost of not doing something? And I think that it would be good to understand exactly the thought process that is meant by the words financial viability or cost-benefit analysis, because it seems to be a moving goalpost, right? Like the urgency now is pretty critical, and so what pound sign do we put on not doing that work?
Does someone want to answer that, or is that something else you can come back to us with? Because I think that is key to what we're trying to do here, isn't it? Is that something that the group...
Answer it, but I'll make a comment. I think in the past we've looked at things financially. What we're trying to do is look at viability of a financial budget and a carbon budget at the same time. So we look at the impact of both and consider, when you talk about cost benefit and stuff, look at the impact on both. The other thing specifically in relation to this issue is we do have a finite AMP budget. We can't increase it exponentially. What we can do is look at the balance of works within that. Can we increase it a bit? How we recycle the energy savings so we cover more of the buildings and get the balance between works which have the cash payback quite quickly, that then we can scale up the rest, but at the same time using some resource to do things which have a big impact but don't necessarily have the cash payback. And we're going to have to learn on our feet with some of that, the best way of doing it. But what we want to do is come with that balance that gives us the biggest carbon impact overall.
So I think as we go on in this committee, this is what we need to understand. So we need to be looking at decisions that have been made and plans that we've got, and looking at how those decisions have been made. Now, whether that's something that can be explained as an answer to that question, or whether it's something that will come up time and time again when we're looking at what we're planning to do, I don't think really matters, but this is the sort of level of information that we are going to want, because we need to understand what's happening. And you know, we don't want glossy presentations, we want the detail of what's happening and to understand why these decisions are being made, because ultimately we may have to change the way we are making decisions in this council, you know. So I think if you can take that away, if you can bring something back in general terms, that's fine. But even if you can't, I think as we're going forward, we're going to want to be reviewing how all of these things are going and seeing what decisions have been made and how that balance has been looked at.
That's fine. I think it's helpful if at the end of this we take stock on which of the your priority areas, so we can do them proper justice rather than trying to do everything at the same time.
Right, so the next one is deliver carbon, this is number 6, deliver carbon savings from the MCC operational estates leisure facilities. Mandy, were you going to say something on that?
I'm really conscious that some of our leisure facilities buildings are probably some of our most troublesome ones, because if they've got a swimming pool, we know that those are really, really energy intensive. And so there's obviously must be a very special piece of work going on here, I would have thought, to look at the options. There's a leisure facility that was put up in my ward in 2015. I remember asking questions at the time then about whether or not it was not possible, for example, to have a heat pump in order to ensure that we could keep the pool warm, and the answer was at that time no, because of the cost of it, and it was right at the start of all of the cuts. However, we're now in a different world, and this might be a good opportunity to get a deeper understanding here about what you're talking about when you're saying you need to incorporate carbon budgets and financial targets. And there's also, these are big buildings, there are massive opportunities here, aren't there, for energy production, I would have thought.
Can anyone answer that?
And I'd just caveat with that, not an expert on the leisure estate, but obviously you're exactly right. I think particularly the wet leisure centres are big emitters, and which is why we did on the previous plan that you've got in front of you, which was drafted in 2016, did make specific reference to the leisure estate. So some of that is kind of general refurbishment and energy efficiency measures, but particularly things like heating poles is obviously a big element of that. I know some of them have put CHPs in, which is a more efficient way of doing that, but it still uses gas, so it's certainly not zero carbon. So we also have had some third-party operators in those buildings, so previously Serco and now Greenwich Leisure operating some of those buildings, so they are ones we do report on as part of our annual reporting. But I think that, again, comes back to some of the decision-making stuff we've just talked about in terms of how we've made decisions on buildings, and as technology's moved on now, what is the kind of decision-making process within the capital programme that takes into account carbon reduction as well, obviously within the financial model that Carol's just explained. I think we are working through that. So I think leisure buildings are a really interesting case study of that, particularly because of the nature of their operation. But obviously we also know all the health benefits that they bring to the city, and we all recognise that they're really important to residents as well. So trying to achieve both of those objectives is really key to that.
So can we get some detail on this one again, a list of what we've got and where we're up to? Sorry, Mandy, go on.
No, I was going to say that it's good to hear, but I mean, for example, we've just finished Moss Side, haven't we? So, but I imagine that was not done within the new parameters that we're talking about. So it'd be quite interesting to see a case study of what the carbon outcome was and is anticipated to be, and whether anything more can be done. And then, I mean, I don't know which leisure centre is next in line for a makeover. I don't know what on refurbishment you call it technically, don't you? But can those lessons, what can we specifically learn from the one that was most recently done to what can be done next?
Yeah, so can we get a report on that to look at? Is that all right?
The right person in front of you who can answer that from the operational estate perspective, so we can certainly do that for the next meeting.
Do the committee want to do that, to look at this? I mean, I think this is an example of everything that we're doing with buildings, isn't it? So is it worth looking at that example? Moss Side Leisure Centre has been done very, very recently, hasn't it? So can we get someone along next time to do that? Is that all right, Lee?
Making quite a few officers.
Okay. William?
I think when I looked at this, I saw it as double counting, although it is referenced into point 3. But I think you've also just described some of the actions that are being taken about this assessment of buildings. I guess I was really just wondering, how effective that's going to be. And again, it lends itself back to, that's great, it's our stock, but what about all the other stock? You have answered some of those questions, but that was the gist of it, really.
So I think we need to kind of bring all this building stuff together, don't we, in future? And we need to be looking at the buildings we've got, the buildings we're leasing out, and all the points that were raised earlier. So when we come back with this document, we can kind of put all these together, and then we can just have a section where we're just looking every time at our buildings and what's going on there. That would be useful, I think. Point 8 is ways of working. Did someone want to say something on this? Mandy?
So I'm not really sure. Is this still about buildings, or is it about how we use our building? I didn't really quite understand what this point meant. It a bit like William said about point 7. It seemed like double counting. So is it about how people work in buildings? Is it about hot desking, for example? What is it? What does this mean, I suppose?
Yeah, no, it is about that. Yeah, it's about how efficient we are at using the buildings we've got. Obviously, things like technology is an enabler of different ways of working. So we have an our ways of working policy now at the council. So it is kind of estates-led in terms of the efficiency of the buildings we've got and how we use them and utilise that space. But I think since the plan's been written, I think we've done some really good work around our ways of working in terms of how staff used buildings. Carol mentioned things like ratios before, that's part of it, and the ability to work from home, etc. all allows us to use our estate in a different way.
Yeah, Amanda.
Thank you for that. Are we measuring it? Have we got a base point?
We don't know the answer to that question. I have to speak to estates and probably our human resources and occupational development team, yeah.
So I think with buildings and what's going on within them, again, we just need the information that we can understand. What are the carbon emissions? Whether you separate it out, I don't know. I'm no expert in this either. Whether it makes sense to separate out what's going on in the building from the building itself, I don't know. It would probably not. But whatever the way is that you need to do it, we need to know what the carbon emissions are from our buildings and the work that's going on within them, and how we can reduce that, and how much we need to reduce it by, and how we're doing with that. So I think, again, that's probably something that this committee needs to look at to get us that sort of level of detail, because otherwise we're just kind of trying to do something, but it's not absolutely clear what it is. So can we take that away and come back with something, with some figures to it that we can look at?
And I think there's a bit of keep it simple, so we understand the impact on our estate and the impact on staff travel, and then we avoid the risk of double count and things as well.
Sorry, I haven't put my microphone on. Zero Carbon Manchester 2050 is 0.9. I think we can raise lots of issues about dates and various things here. Richard?
I'll make a point about the dates, but just a general point, I think, is that we can get a little bit caught up, I think, on target dates, and we can also get a little bit mixed up with the carbon budget limits that are forever progressing, and it's getting worryingly so, actually, because I think, you know, actually when you look at how far we've moved the last 4 years and the percentage of the budget that we've taken up already, and we still seem to be talking about it and nothing, you know, the issue is still pressing. But I think the point that, and I'm sure that the committee will agree, that we have discussed is about how we judge our target and ambition in that open and transparent way. So we've already heard that discussions are ongoing with the Tyndall Centre, which is good news. But what I want to try and avoid, and what we should all try and avoid, is a situation whereby in December we are given a rationalisation on why things are not possible, instead of the ability to influence that process throughout and understand exactly how the decision process is being made around our targets. Because, again, to talk about the way that we make our decisions, we need to be able to openly scrutinise this. And if we are talking about possibly looking at reducing the target to 2030, 2038, we need to not just align ourselves with the Greater Manchester local authorities that are also doing work that seem to be at different dates and different processes, a different stage within the process. We also need to bring it a little bit back, scrutinise those decisions before they're made, and understand exactly the impact on the carbon budget as well. So, I mean, I'm sure Annette would want to add on to the work that she did on the motion, but I'm just very mindful that particularly the original amendment that was accepted around the 2030 target, exactly what work has been done to date to ensure the viability of that target. Because judging on this report and the next report, it doesn't seem like that much has actually been done. And I'm just very mindful that we'll be given an excuse at the end of this year in a report to the executive that won't go to scrutiny. And I think that would be a poor decision, not just for this council, but also for the scrutiny process.
So someone should be able to answer that.
Just to reflect on what you said, Richard, When we brought the 2038 target to the council, we didn't take it direct to executive and to council, we brought it to neighbourhood scrutiny, and every member had the opportunity to have their say in terms of, do you like it, do you not like it, pick it to bits, ask us questions, and of course we will bring it any suggestion back. And this group provides another opportunity for further scrutiny of how we're moving forward, and also for us to share what is of interest to you in terms of how we are making progress in sort of the different areas. Now, this sheet that we have been going through is something that we were reporting against from 2009 to 19, and now we've done this, or we are working on this. We are very, very conscious about what is it that we're doing in the next 5 years, how do we build on this, and how actually do we accelerate and we put it on acid and on speed, because that's what we really have got to do. Reducing our emissions by 50% in the next 5 years is very, very significant, and there's lots of political decisions that need to be made. So, you know, if you look at a building and we want to put lots of money in, let's say, a leisure centre, that is a very, very hard decision when, you know, people are also worried about homelessness, people are also worried about adult health and social care. So I just want to put it on perspective, Chair, in terms of how decisions are sort of taken. I can see that you're trying to...
I understand what you're saying, but what we're here to do is look at the climate emergency motion and look at the issue of reducing our carbon emissions. That's what this subcommittee is for. So I'm not suggesting the council doesn't have to make these decisions, but that what we're looking at here is a reduction in carbon emissions and how we're going to measure that and how we're going to involve people in that process. So the question that was asked is what's happening with the Tyndall Centre and this review of the date. And we know the 2038 date went through the Neighbourhood Scrutiny Committee, but since then we've had a motion to the full council, which was carried unanimously, saying firstly, in the original motion that we should have an open and transparent review to identify the earliest possible date, and then subsequently amended to say that we should look at bringing that date forward specifically to 2030 and that we should have a report on that by the end of the year. So can anyone tell us what is going on with the Tyndall Centre? What review is being done? Why is it not open and transparent? Can we get a report by the end of the year? You know, this is what we need to know in respect to the motion that we all carried.
So, in terms of that, the discussions are ongoing between the Manchester Climate Change Agency and the Tyndall Foundation, and the reports will come to scrutiny, as you have suggested, for you to have a look at and ask questions and scrutinise. And we can bring the Tyndall Foundation as well, so that they can tell you what is the rationale behind the suggestions that they're making. I don't know currently what suggestion they're making because I've asked them to look at it, so I can't give you any further sort of information on that. In terms of what we have been doing since the motion, I think these papers state clearly what we have been doing in terms of...
Stick to one point at a time. We're just talking about the review of the date at the moment. Okay, so we can invite the Tyndall Centre here. We have to discuss when we're next meeting. This has to be looked at by the end of the year, so I think we will have to pass this back to the Neighbourhood and Environment Scrutiny Committee and ask that they're invited to its next meeting, because we might not have a meeting of this committee before the end of the year. So we at least need to look at this end of the year question, and we then also need to look at the open and transparent question. Yeah, Richard.
It's probably a question for Lee, actually, to be honest. And would something that has to go to Neighbourhoods and Environment have to be taken as urgent business at this stage, or are we still able to get something like this back before the end of the year, with enough time for the Tyndall Centre to actually report back on it?
Prior to a formal agenda being published, that can be included with permission through the chair. Urgent business is any item of business which wasn't included on the original agenda. So the November meeting of Neighbourhoods, the agenda hasn't been published. That will be published next Tuesday.
Okay, so just what we do is I'll raise this with the chair of the Neighbourhoods and Environment Scrutiny Committee to try and get the report about the end of the year 2030 date discuss there, and then also I think we need to invite them to this subcommittee to look at the open and transparent review aspect of it. Is that okay with everybody? Okay. I'm aware we've taken nearly an hour already. We said we were going to go for 2 hours. We had lots of questions about various acronyms that we did or didn't understand, depending on how long we've been around. Could we just have, what's the term for it? Glossary. Of all these abbreviations in this document and what they all mean. I think that's, rather than going into them all now, could we get that for us? Is that all right?
Yes, and apologies for that. It's probably around kind of brevity around the table's quite big as it is, so apologies for that.
Okay, so I'm going to continue to the end of this document and then we'll see where we're up to. So point 10 is reduce...
Can I ask another question on that?
Sorry, yeah.
Sorry, just briefly on 9 in the detail, it says Manchester was successful in submitting a stage 1 bid to Urbact for the city to be a transfer network, following on from the good practice. It's the second to last paragraph in the column. Great, but what is it though, and what's the anticipated outcome from this?
Yeah, I'll take that away. I'm pretty sure that relates to a project called Sea Change, which we've been successful with, which is the cultural sector working with other European partners in their cultural sectors to share learning on how they can reduce their carbon emissions. But I'll check that out.
Yeah, go on, Manda.
And can that include the anticipated outcome from it? Thanks.
Okay, point 10 is reduce citywide carbon emissions by 41% by 2020. So this is working to the 2038 date, is that right?
No, so this is working on the target that was agreed in 2009-10, which is a 41% reduction by 2020. So this is what this action plan is based on, hence why it's out of date.
Do you want to come in?
Well, I think it's just it's probably a really good example of actually how difficult it is to get your head around here, because obviously if you start to do the sums around what the emissions reductions there are, I think they probably relate to something like the last year or last quarter or something, but what you can't see here is what the base date was, what the base what the base total was, what the target total is, and it's that people being able to really understand that, I think, is needed. Thanks.
I think the text in the update box sort of refers to the science-based target. Obviously, trying to summarise that in a couple of sentences is quite difficult because there's some quite complex graphs and charts. But the actual science-based target that was adopted by executive was around a carbon budget to 2,100 to stay in, obviously, in line with the COP21 agreement. So that talks about the megatons in terms of the citywide emissions. So there are graphs and things to back that up. But I think you're dead right. We need to, and I think we're working with colleagues internally as well about how do we present some of this, because even this is the qualitative update on the actions, but there is, you've seen before, the quantitative update where we've got charts and pie charts, and so I think how we actually present this information, which is something that's quite complex, in a simple way is one of our challenges going forward.
So this is the information I think that we need at every meeting of this subcommittee. So I guess regardless of how often you report on some of these other issues, this is what we need to be looking at every time we meet. So is that going to be possible for us to do?
What might be helpful is if we came back with a better explanation of the data, how often it's collected, how often it's available, because that will help inform what gets reported back.
Yeah, are we all right with that? But can we have, the next time we meet, an update on this, what is presently point 10? Is that going to be possible to do?
So the citywide data is annual data that we use. So we have more data for our own operations, direct emissions wise. So we started doing that on an annual basis now, because the quarterly data, you get quite a lot of seasonal spikes and there's quite a long delay in terms of getting all the energy bills in and things like that. So we have to, and things like staff mileage claims are lagged because you've got a period of time to claim things. So actually the quarterly data was very difficult to make decisions from and interpret. So we took a view in the past to do that annually in July at July's Neighbourhood Environment Scrutiny Committee, which gave us the full year picture from the previous financial year. So that's how we've done the kind of the really detailed update in the past.
Okay, are we happy if we're given this explanation of when some of this information is available? Because I think that what you're saying does make some sense, but I think we just, again, don't have the level of detail to understand whether we think that's the right thing to do or not. So if we could get some information about where these figures come from, when that information is available, and then we can understand what we're looking at on an ongoing basis.
I think we're starting to get a much better feel for the sorts of things you're looking at, which will help us for next time.
Point 11 is reduce citywide emissions from domestic buildings. Now, we have got lots on this. Mandy.
Thank you. I think we're kind of getting, when we start to talk about this, I mean, the councillor, sorry, we're going on to first names, aren't we? Angeliki was saying that what the City Council is doing is only 2% of emissions in the city. So obviously there's an awful lot that we can do there, and it is really important, but actually what we're doing externally, I know that domestic buildings are something like, is it about 27-30% of emissions in the city? This is the really important stuff, but it's also, I'm very aware it's incredibly difficult. And because I sit on the Housing Planning and Environment Committee of the GMCA, we had a presentation at our last meeting there which talked about some of the GMCA's work on it. And the thing that just struck me the most forcefully from there is that although there's an awful lot of small-scale good work, it's the sheer scale of the work that needs to be done, of that is extraordinarily difficult and that we're not getting to. And you know, this is somewhere where I think we really do need to look at a massive kind of a source of investing, because we need to invest in order to enable not just those people in fuel poverty, but all people to make those kind of changes in their own homes, but also, and particularly an area of real difficulty, I think, is the private rented sector, where one group of people are the people who are going to be expected to put in the capital input for this, but another group of people who are going to reap the benefit of the reduced costs. And so that makes that technically very difficult, and I know it's probably a central government issue, but that's something we really need to be loading on the pressure to help us to get this done, because with our ageing housing stock, I can't stress enough how important it is.
Does anyone else want to? Richard?
Mine was a bit of a wider point on not necessarily the former local authority social housing associations, but some of the others. There is still, I don't know to what extent there's been an audit of the properties in Manchester that isn't held by North Wales or South Wales, etc. But there are still large blocks of flats and housing stock that are in desperate need of retrofit. And at the same time, these associations are being given money from Homes England to continue to build across Greater Manchester, whereas actual fact, it shouldn't meet standards. Their current housing stock doesn't really meet the standards that we'd expect from an agenda like this. And I understand that's a national issue, and I understand it probably requires national legislation and probably a change in the housing standards within the Housing Act 2004. But it would be interesting to know if the council are doing anything, particularly with the LGA, to try and come up with some sort of cross-working with other local authorities, particularly some of the core cities, on issues like this, to ensure that, as Mandy said, that the private sector and some of the housing association stock is retrofitted to the quality that we'd expect before they receive any further national money to build housing in the area.
Does anyone else want to raise anything on this? I'm just concerned about the time now. I mean, I think with this, we have to see this issue moving on. Each time we meet, we need to know what has happened on this issue. So, I mean, I think there are things that I know about that aren't on this table here. So we've got our 4 major social housing providers. I think we need to know what all of them are doing. Plus we've got lots of other social housing providers. And I think, I mean, are we anywhere near knowing the number of properties we've got and which of them are privately rented and which of them are owner occupied and which of them need retrofitting? Do we have that sort of information?
I'm not sure we do have this information. My bit of a plan on this, I've got a discussion with Councillor Richards to discuss this issue with her, both in terms of new homes as well as our existing stock, and take a view on how we are moving forward in Manchester City Council, also together with the Zero Carbon Coordination Group. At the same time, there's a lot of work which is being done by our housing association providers. All of our housing association providers are represented in the Manchester Climate Change Partnership, and as everybody else, they have signed up to 2038. So they're currently busy working with the Climate Change Agency in order to put forward their plan in terms of what they are going to do to retrofit their homes. Apart from what is their plan, we have also asked them what are the barriers in terms of supporting people or retrofitting your properties. So we are expecting them to come with a list of asks of Manchester City Council. This is going to be fed to the group of officers so that we can change the things that we can do to support them and help them. This is also might have an ask to the combined authority in terms of what are the barriers, in terms of what are the projects where they want to collaborate, and what is the ask for funding. And of course there will be an ask to the government as well, which will also take to the core cities, and we will take to the government. So lots of work are going there, but also lots of challenges. The scale of work is very, very big. However, another challenge is, you know, we've got projects that are working at small scale, so the challenge then is how do we bring these projects to scale? If we have got business plans that are there and they're working for a housing association, can we transfer them to another association, and can they share information between them, and how can we support and enable them to do that? How can we also bring funders in, either private sector or public sector funders, in order to build something sort of very, very big? And what is the role of the local council and the local and the combined authority on that space?
So what does the committee want to do with this section? Do we want to just have it on our agenda every time we meet and see how things are moving along? And we can get different reports from different aspects of this, can't we? And I think what you said about the social housing, they're working to 2038, but if they're all committed to doing that and they've all got a plan, then that's good to know, because a lot of these documents refer to northwards, I find. That's because one Manchester's our one. But as long as they're all doing that, then that's that sector taken care of, isn't it? So it's what we're doing about everybody else that we need to focus on. Is there any other suggestions or recommendations we want to make on this section? No. If we can just keep having,
Well, it's really about the skilling up of the workforce that we need to have. And this is actually a massive opportunity for Manchester residents to get interesting new jobs in what will be at least partially really quite a highly technical industry. So, and I'm sure that is somewhere where we can use our influence to get together our training providers, our fantastic colleges. We've got some really good work going on in the universities as well in terms of keeping that work at cutting edge. But we need to make sure that those are linked up with the people who actually train people to do these jobs. And although we might not be able to do this work directly, I'm sure that there must be something that we can do to try to help to catalyse it.
I think what we need to see is an increase in this work being done, isn't it? From all sectors of housing. So I don't know if you can just update us next time with what's happened, and I think we can take it from there. But we need to be seeing that there is more and more of this work being done, and again we need to know that the impact that that's having on our carbon emissions. Yeah, Angelique.
Thank you, Chair. Same as the buildings estates person who is coming to the next scrutiny, we can ask someone from the Manchester Climate Change Agency that works, or we can ask our representative from the housing associations to come here and tell us more if you would like that. Just to take the opportunity to say also that retrofitting homes is not just impacting on fuel poverty, it is something that will impact on people's health. It is also something that has implications in terms of skills, in terms of job creation. There is a report, or the next economy scrutiny meeting will be focused on green skills. So hopefully you will see some of the thinking there around how do we build up the skills for retrofitting homes and sort of all that. However, more than happy to ask someone if you would like to come to a future meeting, or else there will definitely be a report together on 2038 by the Manchester Climate Change Agency.
Yeah, I think we need to look at our own work plan at the end of this meeting, don't we? But I'm thinking if we could get someone from Manchester Climate Change Agency to cover that whole subject at a future meeting, that would be useful. What was I going to say? I mean, I think also, again, this refers to people in fuel poverty, and again, there are issues that run alongside all of this, but we're not just interested in people in fuel poverty on this committee. We're interested in people who might not be in fuel poverty but still can't afford to do this work, or people who just don't know that it's necessary to do. And, you know, we're looking at the whole housing stock in the whole of Manchester, aren't we? So, yeah, so can we leave that one there? Because we're taking up loads of time with this. Number 12 is reduce citywide emissions from energy company. Now, this is about some work Greater Manchester Combined Authority is doing. So do we need to be looking at this here? We can't really influence it other than our role on their committees. Mandy, did you want to say something?
Well, I think this is something maybe we could ask to be put on the Housing, Planning, Environment Committee, and both John Connor and me sit on that, so we can do that. But just to note that I am really concerned that it's amber. I know that I put forward a backbench motion on this in about 2014, 2015, and that work was already ongoing at that point, and I know the reasons why it's stalled, but it's actually possibly an opportunity for us to get some investment into the city. So I think it's really important as a foundation for bringing all of this work together, but perhaps we'll take it to the GMCA.
Yeah, we did neglect to say at the very start that we need to know what red, amber and green mean on this table as well, because some of them don't seem to have been given the right weighting as far as we can see. So we could have that as well. But also, are we happy then with that approach to this issue? Yeah. Okay, 13 then is reduce citywide emissions from energy, identify and develop additional heat network clusters in Manchester. So this seems to link into one of the earlier points as well. Have we covered this as far as we can today? So in future, let's just have this as one item about heat networks. 14 is deliver the Triangulum Smart Cities project. So this appears to be the Art Gallery, MMU, University of Manchester in the main, but included in this is some electric vehicles that we've got. Do we want to say anything on this one at this point? No? Okay, just on the electric vehicles that we've got, I think we would want to know how many of the non-electric vehicles we've got, and why we've purchased 4.
Sorry, I can hear some laughter behind, but I think what the point of these projects are, they're innovation projects, and Triangulum has tested electric vehicles within our fleet, so it's broken down some of the myths around electric vehicles, around their use, and actually the challenge now is not, do electric vehicles work for Manchester City Council's fleet? The question is, how do we get the electric vehicle infrastructure in terms of charging in to buy more vehicles? We know what the cost of them are, we know what the extra cost to lease them are, we know how they operate and how they perform. So this project has taught us that in terms of our fleet, so we can provide details about our fleet and how many vehicles we operate. So it's shifted as a result of projects like this into how do we deliver more and upscale, which I think is the benefit of European funding projects such as this.
Yeah, can we just have an update on that of how many vehicles we've got, what we're doing, looking at charging a vehicle? Sorry, John Connor.
It's fine. Thank you, Annette. So we work with a number of partners, and obviously this would come into that. For someone like Biffa, who would be paying for kind of upgrading the vehicles from current to possible hydrogen or electric?
Who would pay for the cost of that? Because, well, I'm not an expert on waste recycling, but obviously when that contract was tendered, that wouldn't necessarily have been one of the things that would have been requested. I know there's a vehicle being trialled at the moment within that fleet, so we are working with Biffa around that. What would happen in terms of the cost of that? I couldn't answer that personally. We'd have to ask the strategic director for neighbourhoods.
I haven't got the detail in front of me, but there was a loan, I think, to start to shift the fleet to being electric.
Okay, sorry.
I mean, just to make a comment, I mean that is an example where we've got a lag, haven't we? The contract with Biffa doesn't allow us to make those changes unless we enact some element of it, either our own investment, if it's not allowed in the contract. And that's part of the frustration for me, is that there is an urgency now, and yet the urgency can't be met by some of the things that are restraining us.
I think this is something that we want this committee to look at and report back to us about, is what are the legalities of what are we able to do, what are we able to look at in terms of decisions that have already been made, contracts that have already been given, because we should be reviewing absolutely everything that we're doing. And I think some of the issues with where members of the public get very, very frustrated is about these issues where it's already happening and it doesn't look like we're changing anything. And I think what this committee needs to understand is what are the actual legal constraints, or are they constraints in terms of how we operate? Are they bureaucratic constraints? What is it that is stopping us going back and looking at some of these decisions that we've made that we didn't make in light of the climate emergency being declared? And I think from what you've said, these are the sorts of things that this committee is going to, not this committee, your committee, Carol, is going to look at. And I think that's important for everybody to understand where we're at with that. Okay, are we on 15, which is work with Transport for Greater Manchester to deliver a range of citywide transport improvements. Now, this is massive, and we've got a bus consultation going on that everybody must fill in, but I don't know how much we can do with this here today. But Richard, have you got an idea?
I think it's just another example where actually it's about joined up working, isn't it? This is at a Greater Manchester level, and I think what's really important with the remit of this group is that we do have the ability to request Transport for Greater Manchester to send someone in, because these are issues that do impact us. And I think that if you look at, work with Transport for Greater Manchester to deliver a range of citywide transport improvements. We then look at the colour it's being given, which is green, and then we look at delivery of new Metrolink and then we look at delivery of new Metrolink extensions. And I think that we've been talking about extensions to the Metrolink to Stockport for about 300 years. And, you know, it's this sustainable travel aspect that the council is open to criticism on, because we've seen some of the programmes such as the Great Ancoat Street. We've seen some of the good work being done on a Greater Manchester level, not necessarily being replicated at local authority level, across local authorities actually, not just this one. And it's understanding that, you know, do our priorities on sustainable travel match the ambitions set out in this plan, which was 2010? Or, you know, have we moved this on to our ambitions that we are talking about for the next 10 years? Because we really need to address not just affordability, but also just preventing the behaviour that this city is still predominantly car ownership, car friendly, rather than public transport. Addressing some of the affordable aspects of that will help. But actually, if you're in the north of the city, if you're in the east of the city, you don't have the same options available to you than if you're in the south of the city. Some of the cycling routes that we've created are predominantly central Manchester focused. It doesn't connect our neighbourhoods together. So is that something that the local authority can be looking at to sort of fill in the gaps from what the Greater Manchester Authority have left. And so I'd like to see a bit of an overall strategy, and I understand that that requires a conversation between yourselves and Transport for Greater Manchester, and I think this is the perfect example of where we need to go to that Greater Manchester level, get those officers in with yourselves and understand what conversations are happening in order to fill some of these gaps.
So can we ask someone from Greater Manchester or Transport for Greater Manchester, whoever it is, to come to a future meeting? We can ask them, will they come? Okay. Yeah, okay, so should we do that and someone from Manchester City Council? And this is a big discussion that we need to have at one of the future meetings, isn't it? Angelique?
Thank you. I'm very pleased that you have suggested that transport accounts for 29% of the city's emissions, and it is integral in terms of getting it right. And to that end, we have a Greater Manchester Transport Strategy that will see us up to 2040, but I have been asking TFGM for a report on the back of the climate emergency, not that we only just declared, but the Mayor has also declared a climate emergency for Greater Manchester. So I have been trying in my capacity as representative to the Greater Manchester Transport Authority, Transport Committee, to give us a paper on how they're going to match that ambition, how are they going to decarbonise transport in Greater Manchester. We've got very, very big questions, not just around the Mayor's, for example, cycling, the cycling fund, which is currently oversubscribed, while people's expectations, which is great to see, are very, very high in terms of what we deliver on our highway. But also it is very, very important that we've got the ideas to put to Transport for Greater Manchester in order in terms of what we want to see for the city. And this is some work, for example, that we're doing with the city centre transport strategy. We've set the ambition, we will talk to the groups, we will take a plan to them. However, it is important that they tell us that they are thinking about all of these issues that we already spoke about. For example, in order to decarbonise transport, we need much, much more investment in terms of trams. We need to get more powers. The Mayor is asking for more powers on rail, because if rail is not reliable, then people, of course, are going to jump into their cars. And then the other issue that is very, very important is, where is the power? So if we are all going electric, or what's the split between hydrogen and electric? And these are questions that they need to start thinking about, and they need to communicate with us.
Sorry, I think we also just need to add into that there's an interface, but they're not quite the same thing as with the clean air zones, because there's the carbon issue and then there's the particulates issue, and this is a really big communications issue. And unless we think very hard about how we talk to people about that in those consultations and how we roll that out, then I think this, we run the risk of people not understanding the rationale for what we're doing, how you're incorporating a just transition into that, and it's partly the issue itself that we need to make sure we're really clear about, but also then when we're communicating it, the need for clarity about what and why and how and when is paramount, I think.
I think the discussion that we need to have does need to include that as well, because we're not linking any of these things together, and I don't think we're even clear what our own position is on what should happen with some of this. So are we all right to invite relevant people, and we'll have that whole discussion, including the clean air zone as well, because that affects this local authority. It's a Greater Manchester decision that's been made, whatever reason, but it affects us, doesn't it? And it affects our ability to deal with these issues. Is that all right? Do you need to say something else, Rich? Don't say something else. Right, and we're going to struggle to get this finished in 2 hours, but two of us have to go fairly soon, so I'm going to carry on ploughing through this, and then we'll move on to contributions from the public, I think, before we do anything else. So, okay, work with partners 16. Work with partners to increase access in the city to sustainable food. Does anyone... Yeah, John Connor.
I guess just a further explanation. I understand you might not be able to give that here and now, but maybe when we get this document next month or when we next meet, I think that'd be real good to see an update on here, because I see that we've a new provider has been or should have been appointed in June last year. I don't know if I don't quite understand why or what the food board is transitioning into. I know it's an independent body, so I think more explanation on that. But then also the work that's already been done, I think would also be quite good. But yeah.
I think what we can do, if it's all right, is just do a list of some of the specific questions that we're not managing to cover, which are basically, this says this will be done by this date, has it been done? And that goes throughout the document. So if it's okay for us to send that list through Lee to somebody to answer those sort of update questions, that way we can get answers to a lot of those. Is that all right?
Yeah, really welcome this work that's been done, and we know that it's been published, which is absolutely great. I was particularly pleased to see that it was being incorporated into the procurement framework as well, because I think that that's obviously the key to making sure that we do it successfully and don't just produce something which gets put on a shelf and ignored. We did say that we wanted to be a plastic-free city. I know that's not carbon emission, but it's part of the whole picture, so that's great. But when it comes to the procurement framework, can we, is this in addition to the social value part of that, or is it included in the social value part? Because I wouldn't like to see anything else that had already been considered as part of the social value process downgraded in order to make space for this.
Someone want to answer that? David?
We're having these discussions at the moment about the social value in general, and obviously any additional weighting that we might apply. And so I think for each contract you need to look at what are the things you should be adding in there anyway, and social value should be in addition to the contract, so additional value for the city. So things like that on events, I think, should not be part of the social value. But we'd have to come back with procurement and commission on, because I think it's a wider question around what we're in terms of specifications for tenders and things like that. There would be things you should be asking for anyway in terms of environmental sustainability, but then social value should be an additional benefit for the city.
Can I just add to
Yeah,
this that we're also trialing new approaches to social value. So currently, the highways have put 2 contracts out with an additional element of 10% specifically around climate change and environment.
Yeah, that's isn't it? Okay, 18, green and blue infrastructure. Sorry, you go back to 17, yeah?
Sorry, could I just mention a couple of things? One is I really welcome the sustainable event programme. I'm very conscious that a lot of events, particularly go on in the city centre, that disappointingly have high volumes of waste that is not recycled, and I'm really pleased that we put pressure on people that want to use our city for events, and we set a standard, and we make it very plain that we ask them to set that standard. I also think there's an opportunity, and this is on a smaller scale, but I think it actually sets a tone and a standard again that we should be, for example, with our neighbour investment funding, making it clear that we only provide neighbour investment funding associated with events that meet the same standard. It's something we've already said we are going to do in the Deansgate ward. That is going to be a simple thing that we can say to people. This is our standard. We published it. We expect you, if you expect support from the council with neighbourhood activity, then you meet that standard as well.
Are we okay to incorporate that? Yeah. Okay. 18, green and blue infrastructure. Anything on that? No, should we move on? 19, participate in Core Cities Adaptation Group to help adapt the city's climate change. We were concerned about this, that the things have reduced dramatically due to limited resources, because we think this is one of the things we must be doing, is working at least with other core cities and other cities anywhere to get best practice. I don't know if anyone wants to say anything on that now, or if that's something your group will be looking at. Carol?
happy to take that away. I can pick that up through the core cities groups I'm involved in as well.
And finally, 20, embedding carbon reduction objectives in policy making. I think this is what we've already pointed out, that we need to know how this is going to fit in policy by policy, department by department, and what impact it's going to have. Yeah, Richard.
I think that this one is a really important one, and I think it's a little bit of an elephant in the room, actually, because there are some major strategic frameworks happening across the city, Eastlands, for example, Northern Gateway, that have been years in the making. And I'm not quite sure what we're doing to actually retrospectively look at those policies and think, what impact is that going to have on our city's carbon output? And to a certain extent, it's not necessarily going to be good news for the council, actually. And I think that if you look at some of the actions that have occurred more recently, specifically around car parks and things, that you can see it's an element of it's an easy leverage of hypocrisy, when on one hand we are saying, we seriously we consider the climate emergency as one of our guiding principles in all of our policy making. But on the other hand, we also allow the building of car parks within city centre next to a nursery. And I think that it impacts cross-departmental, right? So it goes from planning to highways, etc. But also some of those really major regeneration projects. So I'd quite like to know, and I've asked the question several times, so I'll just ask it again, is to what extent are we going to go back over some of those strategic frameworks and retrospectively fit that into our new priorities, whether that be 2038, whether that be 2030? Is it even possible? And if it isn't possible, let's have that open and transparent discussion, because I think there's lessons to be learned. And if we continue to not consider this target within regeneration and say, well, it's not necessarily the council's policy, it's not our remit because the council can't directly impact this, then I think we're selling the city short.
I mean, the other thing we have got within here is about the local plan, and we need to understand this as well. We've got this 2023 date set on it. Is that simply how long it takes to legally bring in a new local plan? We know it has to go through these stages of consultation and go to central government and come back to us and all of this. If that isn't legally how long it has to take, then can we bring that date forward? And regardless of the answer to that, what can we do with the present within the present local plan that we have got, and what can't we do? That's what we need to understand, and everybody needs to understand. So can we, give us some answer to that, but we need a thorough answer about this, about, where are we up to with things that have already been decided and the frameworks we've already got? What can we do within what we've already got, and how quickly can we get to something better?
So I'll look around. The local plan timeline, as I understand it, is how long it takes to get one approved, given the resources that we've got and the fact that it needs Secretary of State approval. And obviously there's been a lot of high-profile examples when local plans don't get approved. So, the evidence has to be watertight, it has to be robust. There are a lot of steps to go through for that process. So that is one thing, that is clearly a lever we've got. But obviously when written down on paper, when you see it being adopted in 2023, clearly the question is, well, what can we do now? I think there are other, again, not being a planning expert, and we have Julie Roscoe around the table within the Zero Carbon Coordination Group to look at that. So I think that is something that they're looking at in terms of what are the controls we have now, because I think the local plan and SRS and things are only one part of the process. There are design guides, there are lots of different levers we might have. So I think that is definitely part of that decision-making review that we've discussed earlier on. I don't have the answer for you right now, I'm afraid.
So, if we could have some sort of written answer on that question, but also should we invite someone from planning to a future meeting and actually look at the local plan and look at all the detail of that, of what we can and can't do? Is that all right with the committee? Okay, right. Everyone's been extremely patient. It's 25 to 12. We've got two other items on this agenda, which is the motion itself and which is the neighbourhood engagement item. But can I just say, and we'll try and do this better in the future because we want more participation from people who've taken the time to come here and sit here through hours of talking. But I think we just had to get to the point where we know what documents we're dealing with and how we're going to review things in future. So at this point, does anybody want to raise anything about all the stuff we've just talked about? Yeah, I've got 3 of you, 4 of you. Do you want to come, where are they going to sit? Over there? Do you want to just come to the table and press this big button to put your microphone on? Do you want to just get a seat anywhere? Oh, there's one here. There's one there. Yeah. Okay, so I just need people to introduce themselves and say if you're just here in your own right or if you're representing anyone. And, you know, I don't want to curtail the time I give you too much, but if you could try and cover what you're covering in a few minutes. So do you want to go first?
I'm Claire, Claire Stocks, and I guess representing a few different groups. I think my first point is to go back to that decision-making review. You talked, Richard, about kind of retrospectively looking at decisions, but how are you going to, what is the update? I wasn't clear on how are you basically looking at the decision-making criteria for the areas that the council influence, the highways, the transport. These are where you can make massive impacts. So not just retrospectively, but how do you introduce new criteria that mean decisions like Great Ancoat Street wouldn't be taken? Because that decision was taken because £2 million worth of cash a year was needed to be made, and that was put ahead of, for instance, the costs that would be the costs of people's health, which is demonstrated in other kind of places. So you need to move, don't you, to a place where the decisions that you're making, the council is making, you are weighing up the costs of carbon reduction, you know, health, and at the moment that's not happening. And so the question is kind of what are you doing? I'm still not clear from sitting here what is happening about that. Is there a review of the decision-making process? The second point is, again, that bigger picture that to be fair to everyone here, and it's brilliant to see the progress being made, forensic, you know, analysis of the detail, just to go up to that bigger picture, where is the review of the resources, the budget, the staffing that you need to deliver this crisis? The council does not seem to have done the work that's needed. And I'm being fair to the council here. You seem to be trying to solve a crisis without going, okay, what is the staffing we need to do this? There's massive amounts of things that have cropped up in this committee, and you don't have anyone to do it. You've got people working in business as usual teams. Leeds have got 36 people in a sustainability team. Frankfurt have allocated £10 million just to help them do the work to solve the crisis. I'm not talking about the actual crisis work. I'm talking about how do you do the work that you've outlined here. So that bigger picture question, the second question is, where is the analysis of the resources, budget and staffing that you will need to deliver this? Because clearly, if it's an emergency, you need to do that. And the third related point is the governance review. So lots of talk about decision making. The council needs a complete review of its governance processes to put the climate emergency elements into highways, housing, waste, education. So again, that's huge pieces of work. With the best will in the world, you are meeting 8 hours a year in this committee, and people here, you're the good guys, so well done for getting this far. But that's the question.
Can you switch your microphone off? Yeah. Carol, can you cover that, or one of you cover that?
Working through them, I think the budget and the resources is probably in some ways easier to answer. We're just starting our budget process for the next year at the moment, and the priorities in delivering the motion and what that means for our capital budget, revenue budget, are being looked at as part of that process. One of the challenges we've got is we do work in quite a finite level of resources, and we've got lots of priorities and calls on them: social care, homelessness, the need to make huge progress on this agenda. So those are some of the things that we've got to work through. I think to a certain extent it's easier around governance, around future decisions we've got to make, and making sure the right considerations are being put in up front. And some of the things we talked about this morning, we might not have been as clear as we could be, but it's how we make sure that's part of our consideration for all the major decisions we've got to make in the future. And then there's looking back at what we can do differently, and also the lessons learned from some stuff. We can't change everything we've done in the past, but we can take some of the lessons from it. And then there's the resourcing point. I mean, starting point is, again, we don't have finite level of resources to increase the number of people we've got hugely. But as an immediate action, we've got David can now recruit 2 more people to support him working on this. And again, we're looking at it as part of the budget process.
Okay, is that okay? That's an answer.
How many people are working on it at the moment in dedicated fashion?
I think 100% of their time, we'd have to go and look at that, because there's some people, like, for instance, the carbon reduction programme has a senior project manager working on it. There are people in my team, it tends to be parts of people's roles, so it wouldn't be 100% of the time. You know, I think you are right in your point around business as usual. We are, as an organisation, there's a tremendous amount of enthusiasm, and I know it can come across as a bit, you know, we're looking at the detail here, but just to say that the staff engagement events we've done, staff are absolutely up for this, but appreciate the challenge. So, you know, a few years ago we would have been having a different conversation with staff. The conversation now is how do we deliver it, what do we need to deliver it. So I think that's a real positive over the last few months. We'll just say that.
And sometimes, sorry, just to follow up quickly, it's helpful to have it as a part of somebody's role. So, for example, somebody working in the capital programmes team, I want to make sure that looking at design standards and things is an integral part of the role of people in that team, as opposed to seen as an add-on. So there is a balance.
I think that's a really fair enough strategy to make it part of everyone's role, but that doesn't seem to be enough right now. You need to make it some dedicated people job that can actually work on this full time. That's what other councils are doing. Trafford have got an advert out at the moment for a mid-level sustainability lead. I don't think that's enough, but you know, I think that's where you need to get to.
Okay, do you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Jake. I'm representing just myself, my own views, but I'm a part of XR Manchester and other arts venues across the city. There was a lot of talk around funding. Obviously, recently, it is going to be a moneymaker, but the factory being funded by so much council money when we have such a thriving arts scene. Also, I wanted to ask about the fact, I'm not sure of your name, but how you mentioned you used the keyword quick wins, and that is definitely not what we need. We need the keyword in the climate emergency is emergency, like accident and emergency. You have 999 for a point. It's called accident and emergent. You call 999. What's your emergency? You have flashing lights. You guys need to be in an ambulance going at that speed. It's going to be a tough challenge. Things like the airport group, owned by the Greater Manchester Combined Authority. The transport links are rubbish for that, for the airport. Like, they're trying to expand the car parking. That even though there has, over the past however many years, there has been these quick wins don't exist anymore. We need a turnaround to halt this emergency. I think we can't wait for you guys to get your act together. I've kind of lost faith in you guys a bit, I have to admit. That's why things like Manchester International Festival that has so much funding, the same community engagement that had was when the Northern Rebellion on Deansgate happened. The businesses made money, the community engagement and the atmosphere was the exact same, and that was the budget of MIF is absolutely ridiculous. It is absolutely laughable. And that was the budget that happened for Northern Rebellion was minuscule.
Does anyone want to come in on that? Yeah, Angelique.
Thank you, Jake. I'll take that on the chin, and thank you for your passion, your energy, and your commitment, you and the XR movement. I think we all have lots to learn from that. Sometimes I do get fed up with the council as well, would you believe? And sometimes I kick and scream and look at my ceiling when I go to bed at night and thinking, have I done enough? Have we all done enough? Or is everybody expecting me to do everything? Because if everybody's expecting me to do everything on behalf of the council and on behalf of the city, we are not going to get there very fast. So as I was sat there, actually was not sat there thinking, I can't wait for the council to do things. In Whalley Range, we have a climate action plan, and it is activists like yourself, it is members of the community that thought, we can't wait for the council to do things. We are actually going to grab the bull by the horns, and we're going to involve local people. And I got involved, and now we have a climate action plan for Whalley Range, and it is embedded in our ward plan. And I expect that other people do that. Don't wait for things to happen. We are not going to wait as Manchester City Council for the government to give us the money to do things. We are going to try and shake everything we can, rattle people's cages in order to make good progress on that. We are taking our commitment to reduce carbon emissions very, very seriously. And all of our councillors that are here, all of the councillors that sit on that chamber, they are taking it very, very seriously. So please carry on doing your job, rattling our cages. We are going to try and do as much as we can. Can we do more? Of course we can do more. Should we be doing more? Yes, we should be doing more. Can we do it faster? We should be doing it faster. We are not going to leave any stone unturned. We want to harness the passion and the commitment of our staff to change their jobs and empower them to do that. We want to give them the skills to be able to do that and do more carbon literacy so that they can enable their communities to do more. But please do not wait for us. We are not going to wait for the combined authority. I'm not going to wait for Transport for Greater Manchester. I'm going to do everything that I can. I think we're all on the same page on this. We all understand the urgency. The question is how best to do it. And also I think the question is how do we harness the energy in terms of getting the carbon reduction and making an impact as a city. And I think as a city we need to be aiming as high as we can. It is people like you that keep us going. So carry on, and we will carry on our work as well. And if you think that we're not getting it right, this is the right place to do it. Come and challenge us, but also tell us what we're doing right. I mean, these guys, they're working very, very hard to bring these plans here. So give us constructive criticism, and we will take it back.
I think the point you made about language is really important. I think we need to take that away in terms of how we're describing what we're doing, because I think it has to matter that we've declared a climate emergency. I think you're absolutely right. And that should be incorporated in what we're putting out there for the general public, because if it's not, that's where we'll immediately lose people in terms of any good things that we're doing. You know, so I think we've mentioned communications a number of times, and I think we all agree we have to improve our general communications on this issue, but part of that has to be the appropriate use of language in the circumstances that we're now in. So we can just make a note of that. Are you okay with it? Do you want to come back in after that answer?
I'll just give one more specific example. Going to the Ancoats site and seeing the Greater Manchester Clean Air Fund having banners up, that was absolutely disgusting. Like, I don't know if you know her name, but it's presumably it's been circulated internally quite widely. Lilia, the 10-year-old girl who absolutely called out Andy Burnham. I'm ashamed to say I voted for Andy Burnham. I think he's absolutely failed the city. The stuff he does do is good, but it's having that sign outside the car park. It's just like, it is absolutely ridiculous. It's crap. Sorry, excuse my language.
So, I mean, we've already picked up on the clean air thing in terms of who we're going to be inviting and looking at a future meeting, so hopefully we'll get somewhere with that. So can we go on to the next person?
I'm River. I'm speaking for myself and only for myself today, but I am involved with Unite the Union. Like Jake, I was in London for part of last week with XR. And I'm also one of a group of residents who've been addressing the council about the roadworks round the PM roundabout. And I'm going to start with the PM roundabout, and this is just a personal view. I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone else, but I was shocked that you presented those plans to us after you had announced a climate emergency, and by you I mean the whole council collectively, and you said nothing about how that work was consistent with the climate emergency. My impression was you hadn't even joined the dots and thought that was an issue. So that's the first thing I want to say, and I can see Annette nodding because I'm in her constituency and I've said these things to her privately already. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing I want to say is also about planning and transport. I don't see any evidence that the planning system is moving towards encouraging much better use of climate hostile resources. For a long time, if you want to let a house out as a private landlord, you have to have a certain amount of insulation. That was good. That was quite a long time ago. Why hasn't the council moved on, or why aren't you in the process of moving on to demanding passive house for all new builds? Why aren't you saying to landlords who buy a house that's not being let out, landlord applies for a licence, why aren't you saying to the landlord, before you can let it out, passive house? You're raising money to make money out of these tenants. We want you to passive house. It'll be good for the tenants, it'll be good for the planet. And apart from the cost of the planning process, it will cost the council nothing. You've got the power, you're not using it. If you get lots of appeals to the Secretary of State, well, clog up the Secretary of State's appeals system. Well, one of the strategies that XR was using in London was to clog up the police stations by forcing them to arrest more people than they can cope with. You can do that. You can do that by producing planning decisions that are climate friendly, that some people will want to appeal, and you can clog up the central system. You can be part of that, and that's legitimate. Unlike XR, you won't go to prison for it. You're doing your job. Why aren't you doing it? There's a lot more I could say, but Annette's lights come on. I think I should give the floor back.
Okay. Does anyone want to answer any of those points? I mean, let's...
Thank you. My name is Vanessa Hall. I used to sit on the council from 2003 to 2008. Might come back to that later. Just to add to that planning point that River's just made, I went to the Carbon Co-op, had a green open homes tour at the weekend, and there's a company called Ecospheric and a genius of a man called Kit Knowles, and I was talking to him, and he told me that he's sitting on a group that's looking at housing. I think this is as part of a Greater Manchester-wide concern, and he said that they were discussing an idea to change. So the main thing that comes through in terms of planning is people putting extensions on the houses, and it's about the worst thing you can do to your house in terms of energy consumption, because you massively increase the surface area, and it's just really, really bad thing to do. So what he is proposing, and others with him, I think, is to say that they will only give permission to put extensions on houses if people retrofit up to a sort of passive house standard, and that would be amazing. And so he also said that, he said, look at what Andy Burnham's doing in terms of transport, in terms of using those devolved powers that we've got. If we were using those devolved powers to change things in planning terms, we could do great things. And the passive house stuff, it's amazing. I would really recommend people to go and listen to him if you get the opportunity, or get him in here to talk to the subgroup, because he is genius, and it's so good. There's so much that can be done. So just adding to that point, I'd like to come back on other things, but I just wanted to add to that.
Okay, does anyone want to come back on any of these points, the planning point or anything else that's been raised?
I think in terms of looking at the roundabouts, I think we have to get our communications much better in terms of highways, but also across the council in terms of the work that these highways are going to do to, I mean, for the PM roundabout to improve the junctions, but also to improve the pedestrian and cyclist flow over there. But I do think that we do need to get it much better in the future. In terms of planning, I think that this is a very big minefield, and I learn about planning every single day. I think we are going to be looking at how best we can use the opportunity of the local plan in order to up our environmental standards and what we are requesting of the developers. I think that we need to be very ambitious in this, and I think if we can do it as early as we can, the better. The issue, however, does remain that, as yes, important as they are, buildings that we're going to be building in the future, the challenge is what do we do with our existing stock and how do we retrofit it? It is places where people already live, it is places where people already work, and we haven't got many answers on that, and I think that we're grappling with the same challenges as many other cities. So we need to look at examples from elsewhere and what has worked, but also we need to work together to see how we can look at innovative models, because the government is currently not funding this. So we've got funding challenges, we've got challenges in terms of the sheer volume and the sheer scale of what the work is to be done, but also I think that when people are talking about do something about climate change or you're not taking enough action, I think
climate emergency, not climate change.
Okay, climate emergency. I think that we need to ask them and we need to have a discussion with them so that they understand that they are also part and they can be also empowered in order to help us, because this transition into cleaner homes and better standards has also got to involve them. And they need to give us permission to do this. And where they can also need to be supporting to fund it. So we all need to work together on this challenge. There are no easy answers, and we need to go very fast.
Okay, I mean, we've already said we're going to come back to that subject, haven't we? In terms of highways, we haven't really mentioned highways, but I think the same thing applies to what we said about planning and everything else. We need to understand what decisions have already been made, what money's already been committed, whether they are the right decisions or not. And I don't want to get too far into the Princess Road roundabout, but I think because it's my ward and we've all spent an awful lot of time talking about it, but you know, we cannot go down routes that go against the climate emergency declaration. So we need to know what's outstanding, where money's already been committed, what we can do about that if money has already been committed, and if money hasn't already been committed, we need to be reviewing these decisions and see if they're the right ones.
Whose job is that? Where does the accountability lie for that?
I think that's what this committee needs to look at, that's reviewing everything. But I'm aware we hadn't got highways written down there at all. So in terms of that as well, I think we need some information back as quickly as possible about what we can do about those situations. Otherwise, we're just going to be in conflict with each other as these highways projects come up, aren't we? Because it doesn't seem to a lot of people to be focusing on the right thing. Do you want to come back in, River?
Yeah, very briefly, I do accept what Angeliki says, that these things are not easy, but I do think that they are urgent and they need to be done. I do think that the planning department should be revising its rules for submitting planning permissions. New builds must be passive house. Conversions like loft extensions and other things should be passive house for the whole building, and landlords should be made to turn their buildings into passive house at the point that they buy it on the open market and convert it. And I'm sure there are difficulties there, but I can't see them myself, and I would really urge Angeliki to address those difficulties as a matter of priority.
Okay, so the 2 hours of the meeting are up. I'm very sorry. I've done my best to move this along. I'm going to take Vanessa and give her the same amount of time everybody else has had, and then I'll see what people want to do. Go on, Vanessa.
Thank you. There's so much. I'm going to really try to be concise. I mean, I don't really think we've properly dealt with this issue about planning, so I'd like to ask the councillors on the committee. We've heard a lot from the end of the table, and I'm really inspired by this subgroup. Can we have some sort of political response in terms of supporting using the existing planning legislation and tightening that up as much as we can within the devolved powers to do things like that thing that I just mentioned about extensions, about making people go passive house to actually be given permission to have an extension. So that's the point on planning. Secondly, I'd like to ask that the subcommittee asks what is the cost of climate change? What are we facing in terms of economic cost if we don't deal with it? Because that's obviously we are going to talk about money, and that's the thing that we need to balance against, because we're hearing a lot that we've only got finite resources, but it's going to cost so much more if we don't deal with it. So we need that figure to be balanced against. I'm not looking for answers at this point. I'm saying could the committee actually ask for a response on that? And thirdly, in the agenda papers, we refer to the Manchester strategy, a connected city, world-class infrastructure and connectivity to drive growth. So we're talking about how the things that we're going to do to prevent the climate emergency are going to help the Manchester strategy, and we're talking about driving growth. And it's this economic growth that is the thing that's caused the problem in the first place, and that's what we need to get away from. So can the subcommittee review these strategies that we've got as a council, and can we put the question to the council that it's time to stop going for endless economic growth, because you can't have endless economic growth on a finite planet. This is the thing that's messed it up, and we can't use the economy to dig ourselves out of this hole that we've made for ourselves. So we need to, like we're retrospectively talking about going back and looking at decisions that have been made, that's the real nub of it, and it's that business as usual. We can't carry on with the business as usual, because it's just in direct contravention to what we're trying to do. This climate emergency motion that was passed in July is brilliant, but if we carry on with business as usual, we're just fighting against ourselves, and we're not going to win, because this strategy and how this council has been run for years in terms of this economic growth. When I was on the council, I was told we had to have airport expansion because it helped to get children out of poverty in Manchester, and it was rubbish. It was absolute rubbish then, and it's rubbish now, and we can't carry on like this. When I was here in 2008, we had Kevin Anderson in from the Tyndall Institute, and we were talking about carbon literacy for councillors. We're still talking about carbon literacy for councillors, and in these last 12 years, we've got 7 more different plans. We've got an agency, a board, or something else, and most of this meeting has been talking about reports, about reporting back on reports, more reports, plans to alter existing plans. Jake has said it beautifully. It's an emergency. We can't just keep shuffling the papers around. It's got to change, and it's got to change now. This is the point where we can do that. And someone said about this committee not having enough time. 4 meetings a year when it's an emergency, it's not enough. I'd like to ask you, councillors on this subcommittee, to say that you need more meetings and make some real serious recommendations to the Environment Scrutiny Committee. And we talked about having made 48% in savings. That I'm just going to quote lies, damn lies and statistics. If Mark Hudson was still here, he'd be ripping these figures apart, because it's rubbish. It's absolute rubbish. We've not made savings because we've been trying to solve the climate emergency. We've made savings because there's been cuts that have been made anyway. There's loads of buildings been closed, etc. We have acknowledged some of that, but it's not real. And this is just fiddling with figures and writing reports, and it's got to stop. There's some real brilliant straight talkings happened around this table today, but there's been a lot of obfuscation as well. And what we see coming through from the people that write all the report, 48 pages, and what does it say? It says we're still writing reports. We've got to change this. We need to know what the costs are, and we really, really need to get on it. And it's 8 months since the climate emergency was passed, and it's too slow. It's just too slow. We've got to make much faster progress. So I know I've just said a lot there, and there's some questions in there. I'm really aware of the time. Please, can you guys organise another meeting as a start? Thank you.
It seems like this team that's been set up is inadequate. I'm going to be, after this, looking into how we can review this.
Right, so some of the points that you've raised, I think we have already got down in terms of information that we're asking for. I mean, bearing in mind what you said about not having report after report, in a way that's kind of the structure of this, is that's what we have to do in order to get the information. Just a point we were going to pick up in a minute if we get a chance, the carbon literacy. Can we know, are we on track with what was in the motion with that? Are we going to be able to get everyone doing carbon literacy training? And I'll ask the committee in a minute whether we think we need more meetings.
Carbon literacy training, we're not on track to deliver by April for the whole council for all 7,000 plus staff at the moment. So we've got 6 people who've been trained to deliver that in-house. What I think the update in the motion paper talks about is looking at what is the training that's required. So is a full day carbon literacy training accredited actually appropriate for every single member of staff? Or the way we're doing things with our teams at the moment, we're doing lots of presentations, lots of briefings. We've had 2 sessions at the Leadership Summit last week to about 100 people. We've been going out to different departments. There are other ways to sort of try and embed this. So if we could pursue carbon literacy, that might be the only thing we do and the only thing we spend our money on. It might not actually deliver us the results we need. So it's in the motion. I absolutely need to respond to it. But I'm meeting later today with HROD to look at the head of development, to look at what is the actual development offer that we need. So I think it still has a role to play, but in my opinion, a day for everyone in the council. We've been doing the Our Manchester training. I think we're only at 3,000 staff, are we? We've been at that for a couple of years with a lot of resources put into it. So I think that there are other ways to get the message out and embed it into services other than carbon literacy training. But we're about 700 staff have done it at the moment. And I'd have to check the exact figure for members. It's well over half of members, but they're invited to every session.
Okay, so we need a report back on where we're up to with this. I mean, it's by the end of 2020, the motion said, so we need to know how far away from that we're going to be, bearing in mind whatever it is. Just while we're on carbon literacy, we also need to know about these other managers, that there was 300 managers somewhere, and there was a session delivered for 40 to 45, 2 sessions for 40 to 45. So what's happening with the rest of those managers? But I appreciate if you can bring us a report back, on that, as to where we're up to with that. Anything on any of the other points that were just raised there, Angela?
Thank you, Vanessa. That was it was good to hear some of the things that you were saying. It was very challenging to hear some of the other things that you were saying. So I think that we need to agree in a few things and agree to disagree in a few things. And one thing that I would like to disagree with you is that in the last 10 years, however the council has been run, we did achieve 48% reduction in our carbon emissions. So you can challenge that if you want, but this is what our figures are telling us. In the future, I think that we want to make that more robust by working with the Tyndall Foundation so that we have got some expertise and some challenge in terms of what we are doing. We're working with the best. The Tyndall Foundation are renowned across the world on their job to get people to act against the climate on the back of the climate emergency. And we want to be working with them. We want to be challenged, and we want to be advised by people that know what they are really talking about. I think the other thing is just a general point that I would like to make, and I'll start with this. About 20 years ago, when I came to Manchester, most of the trips in the city centre, about 65% actually, were made by car on peak time. Now we are down to 20%. Our city centre transport strategy ambition will see that figure go down to 10%. and this is setting the direction of travel for the city. In terms of managing my expectations and, you know, what we were talking about, how fast can we go, and waiting for the council to act, I think that we all do need to get it, I think, into our minds, as I am trying to get into our mind, that this is the direction of travel. We live in a system which is built around carbon. And in order to change this, we need a system change. So yes, important though as it is to change the LED light bulbs and to get big as a council, because is it this road that needs a cycleway? Is it that road that needs a cycleway? Or shall we put a cycleway all around the city? I think in the environment and in the climate that we work, we need to have a view for what is the most important thing to be done, how fast can we do it, and what is the actual plan. We need the systems to change, we need the decision-making system to change, and we need the behaviors to change. That doesn't change, unfortunately, within one day, as much as I really, really want to change this in one day. So I think we are, like I said, all on the same page, and we can always have a healthy debate around, can we do this faster? How can we do this faster? I think expecting all of it to change in one day, how can we hire a team, never mind find the resources, of 15 people within one day? We can't.
Okay.
So, all right, the point has been made.
I don't think anyone said we need to do it in a day. I've just got to stop you there. It's nearly 15:15. I will let you come back in, Vanessa, and then we'll see what we need to do next.
Thank you. Briefly, I'm really pleased to hear you refer to the Tyndall Centre. I was just reading their setting climate commitments for Manchester paper that on their website, which was dated October 2019. So I don't know if you've had a chance to see that, anybody, but if you haven't, I'd recommend having a look at it. And they were, obviously I've not mentioned the airport. How can I have not mentioned the airport? We've mentioned the airport before, but we're just talking about measuring the emissions. We actually need to talk about what we're going to do about it. So obviously the number one thing we need to do is to stop expanding, just full stop. And in terms of retrospective planning, I know there was another car park planning permission went through. We're talking about how we're doing great at reducing car travel. So ideally, we'd be looking at that. We'd be looking retrospectively at that decision. But we just have to stop expansion. And I think we also, if this is what we mean as a council, we've passed this emergency, climate emergency. Let's talk about it as well. Let's have some really good publicity out there. Let's get that communication out there. Let's say, if this is what we mean, that we care about the climate emergency, that we're going to stop expanding Manchester Airport. Flying's not cool anymore. And then I would say that the challenge after that for the council, obviously it's in the ownership, partial ownership of the council, end domestic flights at the airport. We then need to go on to do further reductions after that, but those are the first two measures. Stop the expansion, end domestic flights. It sounds quite radical. This is my job to sort of suggest the radical things, but really, in terms of a climate emergency, in terms of what we need to do, those are the low-hanging fruit. And then we go on to reduce air travel in the future, reduce like to the near continent travel. Nobody should be flying Manchester to Paris, it just shouldn't happen, but nobody should be flying Manchester to London, just stop it. And
Can I just chip in and add something there that
nearly finished.
We're talking about nobody should be flying to Paris. Scandinavian airports are introducing electric aircraft, not right away, but...
You are making a tangent. Go on. Switch it off.
What I'm saying is that
I lost my track now. Okay, so Stop expansion, end domestic flights, reduce air travel. And this stuff about aviation, this is actually in this report from the Tyndall that I've just mentioned. They're basically talking about three main things in terms of the action that we need to take, and it's deal with aviation, the retrofitting that we've already talked about, and carbon sequestration. But basically we need to plant lots of trees, and we can do that. That's achievable. We could even start doing that. We plant trees in winter. This winter, let's plant lots of trees in Manchester. I know we've got to go through a whole decision-making process, and it's a massive bureaucracy, but can we get that rushed through, that we're just going to plant a lot of trees in Manchester this winter? And yeah, let's talk about the action that we're going to do, not just, especially with the airport, it's not just about what measuring, bringing it into the figures. We've got to start talking about the action that we're going to take, and the council needs to just be really bold, put it out there. Really like to see that communication coming out. Thank you.
Right, I think what we need is it'd be someone from the Climate Change Agency, would it, who we need to invite to have a whole discussion about the airport. Is that all right with the committee? And in terms of trees, we haven't really mentioned trees, have we? Can someone give us a quick answer on trees, or do we need to have a discussion about that?
I think that in the last year we have exceeded the number of trees that we were going to plant, but in terms of, I know that I'm going to set the cat among the pigeons. Yes, we want to be a green city, and yes, we want more trees, but what we are going to be judged against is carbon emissions and reducing our carbon emissions. So we are looking at biodiversity. There is a working stream on that. We're doing a lot to green up our city. I think that in terms of actions around planting trees, we need to see where that features, and also we need to see where do we plant these trees and what type of species are going to give us the most carbon savings.
Dig up St. Peter's Square.
Sorry. Put your microphone off. John Connor.
Thanks, Chair. I think what Vanessa said there about trees is really important, and what you just said there, Angelica, I completely agree. I think we should really be making most of developers and really putting on pressure for them to plant trees. I always try and argue for more trees on the planning committee, but I think, we often do ask quite a lot of them, but we should be putting a little bit more pressure on in terms of the trees and green and blue infrastructure.
Do we want to have a specific discussion about, we have people who deal with trees, don't we? Can we get a person who deals with...
We've got a tree action plan
that
sits under the green and blue infrastructure strategy, and we've got targets and we have data about trees.
Right, brilliant. Can we have a copy of that, and we'll have a look at that and see whether we need any other discussion in it. Is there? Yeah. Okay, right. So that's coming to the Neighbourhood Scrutiny Committee in January. So we'll deal with that. We'll deal with that issue there. Right. Thanks, people who've spoken. It's 12:20 now. Is everybody having to go? That's what everyone's looking like. Sorry. It's 12:20 on my computer. We had two other things on the agenda. So we had the progress against the climate emergency motion. Now, I actually think we've covered a lot of what we were going to cover there. And we've probably just got a few more specific questions that we need to ask that we can add to our list of specific questions. So I suggest what we do is we get these minutes done and see what's in there, and then we will also do a list of specific questions that we'll send to Lee to get answers to. Is that all right with everybody? Is there anything on the motion itself? I mean, there are obvious things like, can we have a copy of the letter that's gone to Greater Manchester Pension Fund, and can that be made public? There's various questions about the leaders signed a document that's raised some of these points with central government, but there are other points that haven't been picked up there. So we need a response on that. I don't think we're in a position to cover this neighbourhood's community engagement paper, at this meeting. So I think we're going to have to schedule that in for a future meeting. Can I just ask, the point's been raised that we should have more meetings, which I think has been demonstrated by what happened at this one. What are the constraints on how many times this subcommittee can meet, Lee? Is there something in the constitution that we...
Constitutional chance, entirely gift to
Okay, so it's up to us how often we meet, so I think that's a discussion we need to have. We need to come up with our plan going forward, and I think we've made a note of lots of people we want to invite and lots of discussions we want to have, so we can just deal with that ourselves. Is there anything else that we need to deal with today? Anyone from the committee? Mandy?
In item 2, the covering paper, so not in the detailed what's been done so far, but there's the work stream external influence, isn't there? And that takes us into working with businesses or other agencies, which is what somebody said today earlier about what percentage of our carbon this is, about 30%. And I don't know whether anybody else has picked up, but because I was on holiday last week, there was the Guardian did a really big section about their own work on the climate change and the way that they're changing their language and all kinds of stuff. I would recommend it as a read to anybody, very interesting and helpful. But one of the things that I picked up was that they have now set themselves a new a standard in terms of their external how they're measuring their own performance, and it's the B Corp standard. And I didn't know whether anybody else ever had, but if we were doing, I know that through the Tyndall Centre we've already been doing work with 20 key organisations about their own standards, but is this something to look at and that we could work with, because there's no point reinventing the wheel, is there?
It's broken. It's run out of time, run out of battery. Yeah, what I'm familiar with, but we can look into it. And I think the general point on that, and I think one of the recurring themes in here and a challenge for officers is we're trying to get this group together to really create a plan that addresses everything that's in the motion and gives, is robust and has tangible things in it and is measurable that we can then be scrutinised against. And I think we need to find the balance between the level of reporting that we're doing on things, particularly on obviously things like previous plans, in terms of versus getting the job done. And I think that is a challenge for us. So we want to produce reports that create good debate and are interesting, rather than things that are using up officers' time that could be spent on things that are more productive. So I think as a group collectively, we do need to kind of find that balance, and I appreciate the previous reports probably haven't done that to the best effect, but we're in a different environment now, and I think we need to do that differently.
Okay, anything else from the committee? Just on this neighbourhoods community involvement paper, are we on track to hold events in every ward by the date we're supposed to hold them by? Is it March next year?
Sorry, Chair. I think that we should either take the paper or we shouldn't in this committee. If you choose to take the paper, I think let's have a full discussion. I mean, the officers have put a lot of work to find this information and pull it together.
Right. Right. And I don't know about anybody else. I mean, what I'm getting from the committee is that we need to finish this meeting now, because I've got to go to work, people have got to do other things. But as the chair of this committee, I'm perfectly entitled to ask you a question about the motion which was carried, which is that we have to hold events in every ward by a particular date. So, I appreciate the officers are here and we haven't got to that point, and, thanks very much for coming, and we do need to go into this in some detail and do it some justice at a future meeting. But I don't think there's anything wrong with the question I've asked, and could I have an answer, please?
Yes, I can come back. So I'm Mark Rainey. I'm the strategic lead for Neighbours for South Manchester Neighbourhood team, but work on this agenda across the whole city. In this paper, what we've been very clear is by April 20, there will be explicit actions in every ward plan across the cities, all 32 wards, on how we are tackling the climate emergency, climate change, reducing our carbon footprint. And there are also a number of events happening in different wards across the whole city as we speak. Some have happened already, some are now being planned. So we're working across the neighbourhood teams to look at this and work closely with our members and our communities as well on those events and meetings.
Yeah, and are you okay to come back to a future meeting and we'll go through this in a lot more detail than we've had a chance to today? Is that all right?
That's fine, yes.
Okay,
yeah.
Cheers, thanks very much. I suggest we close this meeting here, but if the members of the committee can just stay for a few minutes to look at the work plan, or do we need to do that before we close the meeting? Does it matter? And just also look at how many of these meetings we think we need to have. Is that okay? Is everybody happy for the first go at this? We've done our best to get as much done as we could. Okay, thanks very much.
Benefit of hindsight, we spent a lot of time going through a plan which was written of its time, wasn't it? And when you come to it cold now with what we've got to deliver, a plan that was written of its time doesn't necessarily reflect the priorities we've got at the minute.
Okay, are we right? Are we finished? Yeah, thanks very much.